The first thing to understand is that the voice inside your head is not always telling you the truth. It is often speaking from a place of fear rather than reality. This inner voice developed as part of your survival system. Its primary purpose is not to make you happy, confident, or successful. It is to keep you safe, and safety in the language of the mind often means avoiding risk, avoiding discomfort, and staying within what is familiar. Because of this, the voice tends to exaggerate danger even when there is none. It whispers doubts when you are about to try something new. It amplifies uncertainty when you step outside your comfort zone. It tells you to stop, to hesitate, to pull back, not because you are incapable, but because your mind is trying to protect you from potential failure or rejection. However, protection does not always equal truth. Just because a thought feels urgent or convincing does not mean it is accurate. This fear-based voice often disguises itself as logic. It may sound calm and reasonable, saying things like, "Oh, what if you fail?" or "You're not ready yet." But if you examine it closely, you will notice that it rarely offers evidence. Instead, it builds its case on possibilities, not facts. It predicts negative outcomes without certainty and presents them as if they are inevitable. Over time, if you listen to this voice without questioning it, you begin to accept its assumptions as reality. You start to believe that your limitations are fixed, that your fears define you, and that your doubts are proof of your inability. This is how a protective mechanism turns into a barrier. The voice that was meant to keep you safe begins to keep you stuck. Another important aspect is that this inner voice is heavily influenced by your past experiences. Every failure, every criticism, every moment of embarrassment leaves a mark. The mind stores these memories and uses them as references for the future. So when you face a new challenge, your inner voice pulls from those past moments and says, "Remember what happened last time?" It doesn't differentiate between then and now. It doesn't consider how much you've grown or what you've learned. It simply replays old fears in a new situation. This creates a loop where your past controls your present thinking, even when the circumstances have changed. The result is that you begin to hesitate, not because the situation is actually dangerous, but because your mind is reacting to an outdated version of reality. The second key idea is that thoughts themselves are automatic and not always intentional. You do not consciously choose every thought that enters your mind. In fact, most thoughts arise on their own, triggered by habits, emotions, and subconscious patterns. This means that just because you think something does not mean you believe it at your core, and it certainly does not mean it is true. Thoughts are like passing clouds. They appear, they move, and they disappear. But the problem arises when you treat every thought as a fact. When you give your thoughts authority without questioning them, you allow them to shape your emotions, your decisions, and ultimately your life. For example, like, "I'm not good enough" might pop into your mind without warning. You didn't sit down and logically conclude that you are inadequate. The thought simply appeared. But if you accept it without challenge, it begins to influence how you feel about yourself. It lowers your confidence, makes you second-guess your abilities, and may even stop you from taking opportunities. Over time, repeated thoughts like this can form a belief system. And once a belief is formed, it becomes even harder to challenge because it feels like a part of your identity. But it is important to remember that the origin of that belief was just a series of unexamined thoughts. This automatic nature of thinking also explains why the mind often leans toward negativity. Your brain is designed to prioritize potential threats, which means it is more likely to generate negative or cautious thoughts than positive ones. This is not a flaw. It is a feature of how humans have survived for thousands of years. However, in modern life, this tendency can become counterproductive. Instead of protecting you from physical danger, it creates unnecessary mental stress. It fills your mind with doubts, worst-case scenarios, and self-criticism. And because these thoughts come automatically, they can feel constant and overwhelming, as if they define who you are. The key shift is realizing that you are not the voice in your head. You are the one who hears it. There is a difference between having a thought and identifying with it. When you start to observe your thoughts instead of immediately reacting to them, you create space. In that space, you can question the validity of what you are thinking. You can ask yourself whether this thought is based on evidence or assumption, whether it is helping you or holding you back. This awareness weakens the power of the inner voice. It turns it from an authority into a suggestion, something you can accept or reject. Another important point is that not all thoughts deserve equal attention. Just because a thought is loud or repetitive does not make it important. The mind often repeats certain thoughts simply because they are familiar, not because they are meaningful. This is why negative self-talk can feel so persistent. The more you focus on a thought, the more you reinforce it, and the more often it returns. It becomes a cycle where attention feeds repetition, and repetition strengthens belief. Breaking this cycle requires conscious effort. It means choosing which thoughts to engage with and which ones to let pass. When you begin to understand that your thoughts are automatic and often influenced by fear and past experiences, you start to take back control. You realize that you don't have to believe everything your mind tells you. You can question it, challenge it, and even replace it with something more constructive. This does not mean forcing positivity or ignoring reality. It means seeking truth instead of blindly accepting negativity. It means recognizing that your mind, while powerful, is not always accurate. Over time, this awareness can transform your relationship with yourself. Instead of being controlled by your inner voice, you become the one who decides which thoughts to follow. You start to act based on intention rather than impulse, based on evidence rather than fear. And as you do this, the voice in your head begins to lose its grip. It may still speak, but it no longer defines you. One of the most deceptive things about the voice in your head is that it creates stories to protect you, but those stories are often far from reality. The mind is constantly trying to make sense of the world, and in doing so, it fills in gaps with assumptions. When something is uncertain, instead of saying, "I don't know," the inner voice quickly constructs a narrative. For example, if someone doesn't reply to your message, the voice might say, "They're ignoring you," or "You said something wrong." These are not facts, they are interpretations. But because they arise instantly and feel emotionally charged, they seem believable. The mind prefers a negative explanation over uncertainty because it feels more in control when it has a story, even if that story is harmful. These mental stories are often rooted in past experiences and fears. If you've been rejected before, your mind becomes more likely to interpret neutral situations as rejection. If you face criticism, your inner voice starts to expect it everywhere. Over time, your brain builds patterns, and these patterns influence how you perceive new situations. Instead of seeing things as they are, you see them through the lens of what you've experienced before. This is how the mind protects you. It tries to anticipate pain so you can avoid it. But in doing so, it also limits your ability to experience growth, connection, and opportunity. You begin to react to imagined outcomes rather than actual reality. What makes this even more powerful is that these stories often go unquestioned. You don't stop to ask whether they are true. You simply feel them and react accordingly. A single thought can change your entire mood, your confidence, and your behavior. If the voice tells you that you're going to fail, you might not even try. If it tells you that someone doesn't like you, you may withdraw or act differently around them. In this way, the stories in your head don't just stay in your mind. They shape your actions and eventually your life. And the most dangerous part is that you may never realize that the story itself was false to begin with. Another layer to this is that the mind is not designed to prioritize happiness. It is designed to prioritize survival. This means it is naturally biased toward detecting threats, problems, and potential risks, even in situations where nothing is wrong. Your mind will scan for what could go wrong. This is why you can achieve something positive and still feel anxious about what might happen next. The voice in your head shifts focus from what is going well to what could potentially fail. It highlights flaws instead of strengths, risks instead of opportunities. This is not because you are negative as a person, but because your brain is doing what it was designed to do. However, in modern life, this survival mechanism can become a source of unnecessary suffering. You are no longer constantly facing physical danger, but your mind continues to operate as if you are. It treats social situations, personal goals, and even minor challenges as threats. It's threats. It exaggerates consequences and creates a sense of urgency where none exists. For example, making a mistake at work might feel like a disaster, even though the actual impact is small and manageable. The inner voice amplifies the situation, turning it into something much bigger than it really is. This leads to stress, anxiety, and self-doubt, all driven by a system that is simply trying to protect you. Understanding this changes how you respond to your thoughts. When you realize that your mind is biased toward negativity, you stop taking every negative thought personally. Instead of thinking, this must be true because I feel it, you begin to see it as a natural output of your brain. This creates a shift from identification to observation. You start to notice your thoughts rather than being controlled by them. And in that moment of awareness, you gain the ability to choose your response. Another important aspect is how the inner voice exaggerates problems and minimizes your ability to handle them. It takes a small issue and turns it into something overwhelming. A minor setback becomes proof that you're failing. A single mistake becomes evidence that you're not capable. This is how the voice keeps you in a state of fear and hesitation. It magnifies the negative while ignoring the positive. It focuses on what went wrong without acknowledging what went right. Over time, this creates a distorted view of reality where everything seems harder, riskier, and more intimidating than it actually is. At the same time, the voice often underestimates your resilience. It tells you that you won't be able to handle failure, rejection, or discomfort. But if you look at your life, you've already faced challenges and survived them. You've dealt with difficult situations, learned from mistakes, and continued moving forward. The inner voice ignores this evidence because it is focused on preventing future pain rather than recognizing past strength. This creates a gap between how capable you actually are and how capable you believe you are. And that gap is what holds you back. The key is to start questioning the stories your mind creates. When a thought arises, instead of immediately believing it, pause and examine it. Ask yourself where this thought is coming from. Is it based on current evidence, or is it influenced by past experiences? Is it helping you move forward, or is it keeping you stuck? This process doesn't eliminate negative thoughts, but it reduces their power. It turns them into something you can analyze rather than something that controls you. Over time, as you practice this awareness, you begin to see patterns in your thinking. You notice how your mind reacts in certain situations, how it tends to jump to conclusions, and how it creates narratives that may not be true. This awareness allows you to break free from automatic reactions. Instead of being pulled into every story your mind tells, you can choose which ones to engage with. And as you do this, you start to build a more accurate and balanced perspective of reality, one that is not dominated by fear, but guided by understanding and clarity. Another way the voice in your head misleads you is by confusing feelings with facts. Just because something feels true does not mean it actually is. Emotions are powerful, and they influence how you interpret your thoughts, but they are not reliable indicators of reality. For instance, you might feel anxious before trying something new, and your inner voice quickly translates that anxiety into a statement like, "This is going to go badly." The feeling of fear is real, but the conclusion drawn from it is not necessarily true. The mind takes the emotion and builds a narrative around a temporary feeling into a permanent belief. This confusion happens because emotions and thoughts are closely linked. When you feel a certain way, your mind looks for thoughts that match that feeling. If you feel insecure, your inner voice will highlight all the reasons why you might not be good enough. If you feel sad, it will bring up memories or ideas that reinforce that sadness. This creates a feedback loop where your emotions shape your thoughts, and your thoughts strengthen your emotions. Over time, this loop can make your internal experience feel overwhelmingly negative, even if the external reality is not as bad as it seems. You begin to live inside a version of reality that is filtered through your emotional state. The danger in this is that you start making decisions based on feelings rather than facts. You might avoid opportunities because you feel afraid, even though there is no real evidence that things will go wrong. You might assume someone doesn't like you because you feel insecure, even though they haven't shown any sign of it. This leads to missed chances, strained relationships, and unnecessary self-doubt. The voice in your head uses your emotions as proof, saying things like, "If you feel this way, it must be true." But in reality, feelings are temporary and often influenced by factors that have nothing to do with the situation at hand, such as stress, fatigue, or past experiences. Learning to separate feelings from facts is a crucial step in regaining control over your inner voice. It requires you to pause and examine what you are experiencing. When a strong emotion arises, instead of immediately reacting, you can ask yourself what the actual evidence is. What do you know for certain? What are you assuming? This process helps you ground yourself in reality, rather than being carried away by emotional interpretations. It doesn't mean ignoring your feelings. They are important signals, but it means not letting them dictate your beliefs or decisions without question. At the same time, the inner voice has a tendency to repeat past pain as if it is happening in the present. The mind holds on to experiences that were emotionally intense, especially those that involved failure, rejection, or embarrassment. These memories are stored not just as events, but as emotional imprints. So when you encounter a situation that even slightly resembles a past experience, your mind reacts as if the same outcome is about to happen again. It brings back the same fears, the same doubts, and the same negative expectations, even though the circumstances may be completely different. This is why you might feel a strong sense of hesitation or anxiety in situations that logically shouldn't be threatening. Your inner voice is not responding to the present moment. It is responding to a memory. It is trying to prevent you from experiencing the same pain again. But in doing so, it treats every similar situation as a repeat of the past. This creates a pattern where you become stuck, avoiding growth because your mind keeps reminding you of what went wrong before. It doesn't account for the fact that you have changed, learned, and grown since then. It operates on outdated information, applying old conclusions to new situations. The repetition of past pain also strengthens negative beliefs about yourself. If you failed at something before, your inner voice may say you always fail, even though that is not objectively true. It takes a single or limited experience and turns it into a general rule. This is how limiting beliefs are formed. They are not based on a full and accurate picture of your abilities, but on selective memories that the mind has chosen to emphasize. Over time, these beliefs become deeply ingrained, influencing how you see yourself and what you believe you are capable of achieving. Breaking free from this pattern requires you to consciously update your perspective. You have to recognize that the past does not define the present unless you allow it to. Just because something happened before does not mean it will happen again. Every situation is different, and you are not the same person you were in the past. You have new knowledge, new skills, and new experiences that change how you can respond. When your inner voice brings up past failures, you can acknowledge them without letting them control you. You can see them as lessons rather than predictions. It is also important to understand that the mind tends to focus more on negative experiences than positive ones. You may have succeeded many times, but your inner voice will highlight the few times you didn't. This creates an imbalanced view of your life, where failures seem more significant than they actually are. By consciously reminding yourself of your successes and the progress you've made, you can begin to counter this bias. You can create a more balanced narrative that reflects reality more accurately. As you develop this awareness, you start to notice when your inner voice is operating from emotion or past experience rather than present facts. You become less reactive and more intentional in your thinking. Instead of automatically believing every thought, you begin to question its source and validity. This shift doesn't eliminate negative thoughts or emotions, but it changes your relationship with them. They no longer have the same power to control your actions or define your self-worth. You start to see them as temporary mental events rather than absolute truths. And in doing so, you create space for growth, clarity, and a more grounded sense of self.